When's the last time you've seen a video game manual be included with a video game? And I'm not talking about fan-made Etsy manuals or third-party limited run manuals either. Because what I'm talking about is
first-party, directly from the developer, instruction manual on the opposite side of your game cartridge or disc. It's probably been a while since you've actually seen one or maybe even thought about one. I mean, at this point, everyone's kind of buying their games digitally, so I wouldn't even expect you to really be thinking about a video game case in general.
If you're a bit of a physical video game collector like myself, then you know just how great it feels to find a complete in-box copy of whatever game you've been searching for. Because seeing it like this is a bit dismal. But when did this whole fad of not including an instruction manual with your game become the thing to do? Just how important are these instruction manuals when it comes to video games? And overall, is the disappearance of video game manuals the first step in the removal of all physical media? But before we can start talking about the disappearance of video game manuals, we first have to talk about their beginnings.
Back in 1972, the very first video game home console would make its way into families' homes all across America, the Magnavox Odyssey. Being the first video game home console in 1972 meant that you weren't going to get much bang for your buck. Depending on where you were from, the Magnavox Odyssey came with around 10 to 12 game cards that all had different operations. But just because you had this many game cards didn't mean you were going to have the best play experience. Because this is what the Magnavox Odyssey displayed after inserting one of these game cards. Literally, this is all the Magnavox was able to do. The reason for this being was that you were given sheets of transparent film that you would overlay on top of your TV in order to actually play your games. Games such as Pong used a tennis court sheet, Simon Says had a pack of playing cards involved with these two kids on the sheet, a ski game had you following the path through mountains and checkpoints, Haunted House had a giant mansion in which you would try to catch another player. Pretty much, your graphics for these games were printed on sheets of paper. And so this is where the introduction of an instruction booklet came in handy. Because without having any sort of instructions, how were you supposed to know what the purpose of these little white boxes on the screen were for?
It's kind of a funny thing to think about as this brand new video game home console would hit the shelves, but really in order for you to play these quote-unquote games, you would need to use a lot of household items and your own imagination just to kind of fulfill this gaming experience. And that's pretty much how the first generation of gaming went. Literally every single game had to come with an instruction manual because the games were literally so bare bones. Without them, you'd have no idea what to do with it. For the most part, a lot of these early gaming systems kind of all followed this same premise where you were pretty much just playing board games in a digitized version. And I know it's pretty boring to say that instruction manuals were included with a lot of these early games because you basically needed to follow instructions to play the game. But that's pretty much where it all started from. But if we jump a few years into the future where video game graphics get a little bit better, not a whole lot, it was here where you'd start to see a lot more story-driven games being put out onto the market.
Although probably not the first to do it, 1978's Adventure for the Atari Video Computer System would not only have its controls listed out in its instruction manuals, but the quest of finding an enchanted chalice upon 3 separate castles was now given to the player. No longer were you given a bare bones 1-2 movement game because now you were following a story that was to drive you in this journey. I could mention a number of story-based games that came out years prior, but honestly, how can looking at a wall of text really be considered a video game? Moving on to the glorious year of 1983, video games were at an all-time high. And I'm not here to bore you with the whole history lesson, so let's just start looking at when video game manuals really started to become unique. With the advancement of such technology, video game home consoles were now able to give way better experiences. Let's look at what is now known as the Atari 2600, where although the controls were still basic, games such as Oink and River Raid gave the player beautiful illustrations included in their instruction booklets to really expand your imagination when, having the controller in your hand. The third generation of gaming brought consoles such as the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Atari 7800, and the Sega Master System. And with these home consoles came games that, till this day, continue to be talked about. Super Mario Bros., Ball Blazer, Alex Kidd in Miracle World. Looking at these video game manuals compared to years prior is kind of crazy to see since the newer manuals for games went into so much detail. Developers got so far into instruction manual making that they started to take pictures of the game on a TV just to show the player an actual visual. And you know, one of my favorite things that you start to see in manuals being brought up is the ability for the player to add their own notes into these booklets. One notable game that does this is the original Legend of Zelda for the NES. Having the player traverse such a large map resulted in the game including a map with empty squares in order for the player to fill it out by themselves. The original Final Fantasy for the NES as well has an entire sheet where the player can take notes of what's in each dedicated area of the map.
But what about the countless number of games that decided to include notes/memo sections at the very end of their booklets?
If you were ever once a bored child like myself, you would take the time to go through these instruction booklets and realize that there was a lot of empty space at the end of it. And just like that, Uniracers for the Super Nintendo knew no one was ever going to use this, so they instead included a sly little message at the end. It's so much cooler to see something as unique as this being put in, but overall, the entire Uniracers manual just seems like it's written in the most casual humorous tone.
And that's another important aspect when it comes to these manuals included with the game. A lot of them are so unique that many people till this day still remember all the little stories and artwork that was included in them.
Mortal Kombat 1 included little fighter descriptions as well as a comic book rendition of what these characters would look like in their story. F-Zero for the Super Nintendo does the same, as it has this insane 7-page comic of Captain Falcon's story. And this one is really nice to look at, and it just feels like it really puts you in the mood to race as fast as possible. And jumping back to Zelda, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past has such a beautiful and charming 5-page story at the beginning of its booklet to, really set the stage of what you're about to get into. But, having a video game manual doesn't always have to be unique, and a lot of times these booklets were made with the intention of just providing the player with all the information they ever needed when it came to their playthrough. SimCity does a helpful job of practically teaching you how to build a metropolis. Probably every single JRPG video game manual that I've seen has literally the smallest pieces of information needed, say on an enemy or a weapon to even items and of course the map. Final Fantasy games do this a lot, Secret of Mana does this, and Chrono Trigger does the same.
The manuals that I personally like to see are the ones that transport you into a whole nother world. This is either done by turning the booklet into a brochure or some sort of diary from the game itself.
Pitfall 2 for the Atari 2600 has its story for your journey, plus all the instructions you need to play the game, all written in what seems to be an explorer's journal. Wii Sports Resort opens its instruction manual with the first page introducing you to your brand new island getaway with over 12 activities you can spend your time away on. Grand Theft Auto Vice City plays upon this notion even further, literally labeling its manual as a tourist guide with its own little fake advertising pages and its own music station pages. Definitely one of the better takes when it comes to this route.
But what about the secrets they added in these manuals?
The Pikmin 1 manual gives you a height reference of Olimar and the Pikmin, showing you that they are literally smaller than a GameCube memory card. I think that's pretty cool, but what I think is even cooler is the Star Tropics manual for the NES. Because once you get to the end of the game, you literally have to dip this manual into water in order for you to find a secret password to further complete the game. Probably one of the craziest ways to include a manual, but honestly I feel like it's things like that that make a game so memorable.
As a kid, I never really thought much of video game manuals, as I was always just so ready to jump into the game as soon as I got home. But as you grow older and you find yourself deeper in crippling debt trying to collect games sometimes as old as yourself, it's obvious that these manuals, although they might just seem like a bunch of useless pieces of paper, usually had so much effort and creativity put into them. You tend to appreciate these smaller things when it comes to collecting. I mean, there's a reason why there's some collectors that are so picky when it comes to complete in-box items. These little tips or secrets or sometimes jokes that the creators of the games included in these manuals, in hindsight, are just really nice touches to video games as a whole. As the 2010s passed and games were slowly but surely becoming more digital, in order to cut cost on the production of games, you'd start to see video game cases become more and more empty. As a 3DS collector myself, seeing a lot of these later 3DS releases including a boring piece of paper with a quote-unquote digital instruction guide is a bit dismal, as I said at the beginning of the video. Now, the digital guides are kind of cool, I won't lie, but that's besides the point because nothing beats being able to hold a $500 booklet. I do recall a bit of this happening with a few Xbox games I had as a teenager as well, which, by the way, kind of weird for Microsoft to put the games on the left side. I don't know, that's odd.
But with the disappearance of these video game manuals, should the physicality of video games being sold be brought into this occasion as well? Stores such as Best Buy are already on their way to get rid of all physical media. It's been mainly movies first, which is okay because honestly, everyone just streams movies now, and like, who even owns a DVD player anymore at this point? We're so far into the future that movies don't even... With the introduction of streaming services being practically everywhere, there's really no need to buy anything physical as long as you have a decent internet connection. Subscriptions such as the Xbox Game Pass literally give you like hundreds of games for as cheap as $1 sometimes, so it's no wonder that the production cost of games has been trying to be cut so much when nobody even cares about physical games anymore. There's no use for an instruction booklet to even be thought of at this point in time because there's not even a physical case for games anymore.
It's quite a sad thing to witness, and honestly, there's not really much that we can do about it. Or can we? No, we cannot. But what we can do is appreciate how such a simple little booklet included with these games gave creators and developers another little outlet to really try to pull in their audience into whatever game that they sold, or you bought, or you were given. Subscribe.